Good morning, you're watching A News. I'm Dilek Tuna. Here are the headlines for the hour. Zelenskyy rules out ceding the Donbas region as Russians make a fresh advance. The Trump-Putin summit is to be held at Elmendorf Air Force Base in Alaska. The State Department says Baku and Yerevan's deals with Washington are to unlock the potential of the South Caucasus. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says he completely rejects any deal involving giving up territory in Donbas in return for peace. The firm stance comes as US President prepares for a high-stakes summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska on Friday, a summit Ukraine wasn't invited to.
Ukraine says it will not cede a single inch of its territory, including Donbas, in exchange for a ceasefire. That's according to President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, who warned any withdrawal would unblock a clear path for renewed Russian attacks, potentially toward Zaporizhzhia, Dnipro and Kharkiv. His warning comes just days before the Trump-Putin summit in Alaska on Friday. Talks that Zelenskyy has been excluded from, stoking fears in Kyiv that President Vladimir Putin is angling to win territory on the table. President Donald Trump has already floated the possibility of some swapping of territories. The idea has also raised alarm not only in Kyiv, but in Europe. Zelenskyy and European leaders say any settlement must include Ukraine and be backed by concrete security guarantees, not a blank check for land. Ukrainian forces say they still hold about 30% of Donetsk, around 9,000 square kilometers, and views those regions as vital counter-offensive ground. Meanwhile, Russian troops have intensified their summer offensive, advancing near Dobropilya, raising the stakes for Kyiv and amplifying concerns over a push for territorial leverage. Kyiv insists peace without Ukraine is not peace at all, saying the only deal that matters is one forged with Kyiv's active involvement and backed by unbreakable guarantees for Ukrainian sovereignty.
Europe has now overtaken the United States in total financial aid to Ukraine, providing more than 35 billion euros as military production on the continent surges. Meanwhile, in Kharkiv, prosecutors are collecting and cataloguing thousands of Russian missiles, rockets and drones. Evidence, they say, will be crucial for a future international war crimes tribunal. Our Fikret Dolokanov reports from the graveyard of Russian weapons.
Europe has bypassed the US in terms of financial aid to Ukraine. The total amount of the aid reached 35.1 billion euros, which is 4.4 billion euros more than American aid to Ukraine. It happens on the background of European countries increasing their military production. Financial Times reports that European countries have increased their military production in 3 times since the beginning of the war in Ukraine. At the same time, the countries are waiting for the summit in Alaska between Trump and Vladimir Putin. Ukrainian officials are largely skeptical about this meeting, as well as many foreign analysts. They think that Putin will use this meeting in order to extend the duration of the war and to gain favorable grounds for himself during the negotiations. We are now in Kharkiv. We're standing in the graveyard of rockets, missiles and drones launched by Russia during those 3 years of war. And together with us is the spokesperson of the prosecutor's office of Kharkiv, Dmytro Chubenko. I would like him to tell us a bit more about what was going on here during this over 3 years period. Could you please tell us how is the situation on ground and how this all has been collected here, how this idea appeared for the first time?
This area is a storage site for physical evidence of war crimes committed by the Russians. Here, about 15 to 20 main types of munitions used by the Russians to strike the city of Kharkiv are presented. And these are only the munitions used to hit the city itself. In total, more than 22,000 strikes have been carried out across Kharkiv and the Kharkiv region, using missiles, artillery shells, mortars, and multiple rocket launch systems. Systems such as Grad BM-21, Uragan, Tornado, Smersh, ballistic missiles, S-300, Iskander, cruise missiles, Caliber, Shaheds, Jirani, and others were employed. All these types of weapons are represented in this collection. Their primary purpose is to provide evidence in future tribunals proving the guilt of the Russian Federation. For these crimes, establishing their legal responsibility for these attacks, especially since some of this weaponry was manufactured within the independent Russian Federation. Russia is the main producer and operator of these weapons, and certain modifications and types are found exclusively in Russian arsenals, which serves as one form of evidence of their involvement. Additionally, the trajectories of missile flights recorded by the Ukrainian Defense Forces and their partners, as well as other types of evidence collected from site inspections, utilizing advanced technologies to analyze impact angles and geolocation, all contribute to confirming Russia's responsibility for these war crimes.
What is the latest addition to this unfortunate collection?
One recent trend among the Russians is the use of loitering munitions, primarily the Geran 2, which Russia has already established production of within its territory. These are launched dozens of times a week against the city and the Kharkiv region. These are small aircraft type, UAVs, equipped with damaging elements, mostly homemade explosive devices or RPG projectiles, attached grenades, and similar payloads. Such attacks do not target military objectives. They are carried out against residential neighborhoods in Kharkiv to create panic, suppress resistance, and inflict moral and psychological pressure on the population. Overall, the Russians aim to terrorize the local population through these attacks, which lack any military purpose and are solely intended to affect civilians psychologically.
After the war ends and everything is finished, what do you think will be done with all this? What are the plans for all this?
First, we preserve these munition fragments as physical evidence. They have already been examined by Ukrainian explosive ordnance disposal specialists. The exact weapon types and modifications have been documented. Later, during tribunal proceedings, further examinations by experts, prosecutors, and judges will be necessary, and some of these munition fragments may be sent for expert analysis at the tribunal and brought to court hearings. The world community now understands who is waging this war and who committed this aggression. However, to legally establish the fact of aggression and its consequences for the world community, the tribunal will consist of judges from various countries who may not fully understand what is happening in Ukraine, how Russia started this war, why and how often it has attacked. For them, this will all be new. While Ukrainians have already experienced this, the tribunal judges and prosecutors, many of whom will be foreigners, will need to be shown this evidence anew and start this process from the beginning. Therefore, Kharkiv prosecutors are working to document these attacks in real time, recording detailed information about the victims, missile trajectories, types, models, and launch sites. All this is essential for the tribunal. In other words, we are working on the legal front to hold Russia accountable for these crimes.
In Ukraine's frontline city of Kharkiv, an architect has transformed an abandoned dormitory into a lifeline for elderly and disabled residents displaced by war. Fikret Tolukhanov has more.
Що ми ні на що не претендуємо, і медсестри за цим слідкують.
Коли війна почалась, я взагалі була за кордоном.
When the war began, I was actually abroad on an architectural tour because I'm an architect. But I decided on the very same day the war started to buy a ticket and return to Ukraine to support the army and to support the civilian population. I was back in 3.5 days, and since then I haven't left Kharkiv. In Kharkiv, at first, the city was surrounded by Russian troops, and we had only one road leading to Kyiv. Many people were left trapped in their flats, locked inside. I joined forces with other people, about 30 volunteers, to search for these people, rescue them, and get them out of their homes. Then we rented this dormitory. It was in a very neglected state, with no proper facilities. I had a friend who had no legs, and she gave me many phone numbers, because people with such special needs tend to keep in touch with one another. In this way, we found 270 people. Later, we realized we couldn't look after each of them individually. That's when we decided to rent this building. That was on the 20th of March 2022. Step by step, we cleaned the place, brought it into order, and now we have 60 residents here. Over the course of the war, about 300 people have passed through what we call this shelter. We call it a big family, because I want these people to feel as though they are part of a large family. These people were born in villages, because Ukraine used to be a rural, agrarian country. So we try to recreate for them the atmosphere they had in their childhood. Because, step by step, they become like children again, losing their skills day by day. But they are children without a future. We also try to invite many people to visit them. For example, musicians giving concerts. And we take them to the botanical garden, the zoo, and to church every week. In this way, we also begin to build civil society here, because many volunteers get involved in this work. We start to form friendships, and it becomes a very large and rich community of helpers. This is a huge problem for Kharkiv because we haven't surrendered the city. But it is constantly on the edge, on the front line. We're 20 kilometers from the Russians on one side and 30 kilometers on the other. We have 500,000 internally displaced people, 130,000 of them elderly or with special needs, and 30,000 of them in need of round-the-clock care. In Kharkiv, there are only 8 facilities that can provide this kind of care. Before the war, they had 3,000 residents in total. Now they have 6,000. They're overcrowded, and there's nothing else available. Volunteers bring people to us from the front line. Local communities call us to ask if they can bring people here, and the regional center also sends them to us. Every foundation, I've realized, helps once, for the sake of making a picture, telling the story of how good they are. But this continuity, keeping it going endlessly, is very hard. We have 15 staff members who lost their jobs during the war and found work here. They're very responsible, and we're deeply grateful that they care for our elderly residents, that they treat them with attention, respect, and empathy, real empathy, which is so important for us. The main thing is to give people maximum independence, to teach them to walk with crutches, or to move independently in a wheelchair. And I have a studio that designed this territory you see here. It's 1.3 hectares. I believe that if we build more accommodation to European standards, plus a restaurant, library, and administrative building, we could rent out rooms to people who can afford it. With that income, we could support those with very small pensions and no family to care for them.
Дуже важко, і треба якось, я думаю, знаходити, рішення цієї проблеми.
Yeah, so I was working for the Department of Veterans Affairs in the United States, working with veterans in the hospital, and this population that we have here is very similar to that. Although they're not combatants, they have a lot of the same issues: PTSD, injuries from the war, whether their house was blown up or they were injured in some other way. They have the stress issues, the anxiety issues, and a lot of the same medical conditions. So there is a big similarity. We try to make this a place where there's respect and where there's dignity and where people can live a somewhat normal life in spite of being 25 kilometers from the Russian border. We have a lot of people who either have learned to walk by themselves at home in the past, or they come here and they've been bedridden for 3 months or 3 years or 5 years, and they say, I never had any rehab, I didn't have the money, I didn't have the money for a hip replacement. So we have a number of people here who we have started to work with and who are now walking again. Very slowly, but they can walk again. We'd start doing stuff. There's not a word spoken, and he knows all the exercise. And then we're doing stuff with weights and bands, and we're working the biceps, and we're working the triceps, and we're working the shoulders, and we're working the chest, and the forearms and the legs. You know, doing things with the legs.
You don't really need words for that.
So you don't need words for that, and it just is very smooth. And we chat about different things, and well, you know, we use Google Translate, but it's a workout session for 30 minutes where he gets a great workout and he knows exactly what to do because we've been doing it for 2.5 years. Now, when someone new comes in and they have had a hip fracture that was not repaired, or they've had a stroke and they've never had any rehab and they haven't been out of bed for 5 years. Now I brought weights, I brought different supplies. I've had a bunch of donors in the United States who said, hey, we want to be a part of this. We're going to get you exercise bands. We're going to get you wrist weights. We're going to get you devices for foot drop. It's great, you know, being able to be productive and change someone's lives like this is just it's an incredible thing. Here, they're getting something that they have not gotten in the past, and that's people paying attention to them and saying, yeah, you've got this issue, let's work on it, let's figure it out. It doesn't matter if you don't have any money.
Yeah.
Let's figure this out, let's make it work, let's get your life back together again.
All this and much more in the full broadcast of the Frontlines Ukraine documentary, to be premiered on A News soon. US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin are set to meet on Friday at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson in Anchorage, Alaska. This will be their first summit during Trump's second term, focusing on efforts to end Ukraine-Russian war. The Trump administration has downplayed expectations for a major breakthrough, describing the meeting as a listening exercise. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and European leaders stress that peace must include Ukraine and respect its sovereignty. Ahead of the summit, they will hold a virtual meeting with Trump on Wednesday to reinforce this. Russian President Vladimir Putin and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un have discussed the war in Ukraine ahead of his summit with Trump. During the phone call, Putin praised North Korean troops for their role in repelling a Ukrainian incursion into Russia's Kursk region, highlighting the deepening military cooperation between the two nations. The leaders also discussed their strategic partnership and plans to strengthen ties further. Notably, Putin briefed Kim on his upcoming summit with US President Donald Trump in Alaska later this week. Kim Kyun-hee has been arrested on charges including stock fraud, bribery and unlawful influence. She's accused of wearing an expensive necklace at a NATO summit and accepting gifts from a religious organisation. Prosecutors requested her detention due to the risk of evidence being destroyed, and the court approved the request. Her husband, former President Yoon Suk-yeol, is currently on trial over a failed attempt to impose martial law. This is the first occasion a former First Lady has been imprisoned alongside a former president in South Korea. Former Israeli Air Force pilots and activists protested in Tel Aviv yesterday, demanding an end to the war in Gaza and the release of the remaining hostages. In a separate rally, demonstrators targeted an air group they accuse of worsening Gaza's hunger crisis.
Protests continue in Israel over the war in Gaza, but this time there were hundreds of former Israeli Air Force pilots and reservists who rallied outside the military headquarters in Tel Aviv on Tuesday. They're calling for an immediate end to the conflict and the release of the hostages. The demonstration comes after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced his plan to take control of Gaza City. The protesters urged Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir to oppose expanding the operations, warning it would endanger hostages and civilians.
We would support and encourage the Chief of Staff in his objection to the expansion of the Gaza war, which will serve no goal of security for Israel, will risk the death of the hostages, of Israeli soldiers, of many more innocent Palestinians in Gaza, and will reach no strategic goal for Israel.
We are calling the government to bring back all the hostages, even if it means to stop the war. Immediately, first of all, to bring back the hostages back to Israel, alive, as soon as possible. The time is running out now.
Separately, demonstrators were outside a Tel Aviv hotel where the staff at the American Gaza Humanitarian Foundation are said to be staying. Protesters accuse the organisation of worsening Gaza's hunger crisis.
We oppose every action that the Gaza Humanitarian Fund are doing. They must close now. Aid must flow to the 400 points that are existing with UNRWA and all the other agencies that are ready to do their work, so the food comes to everybody, not only young men that are prepared to walk for 8 miles, sleep outdoor and run like madmen to catch, a few things that are almost nothing, to help their families survive.
The UN has refused to work with the foundation, citing neutrality concerns and alleging that its operations militarise aid distribution. The protests come as Israeli forces continued bombardments in eastern Gaza City, killing at least 11 people overnight, according to witnesses and medics. Meanwhile, in Cairo, Hamas leader Khalil al-Hayya arrived for talks aimed at reviving a US-backed ceasefire plan after negotiations in Qatar stalled in late July.
The US State Department welcomes the historic initialing of a peace declaration between Armenia and Azerbaijan, facilitated at the White House on the 8th of August. US State Department spokeswoman Tammy Bruce stressed that the declaration signed by the leaders of Azerbaijan and Armenia is very important for the American President Donald Trump. She emphasized that bilateral agreements signed by two leaders with the US unlocks the great potential of the South Caucasus region in trade, transit, energy and infrastructure. Previously, we discussed the recent Washington brokered deal between Azerbaijan and Armenia and Turkish perspective on this milestone agreement and its strategic implications with Hey Eitan Cohen Yanarojak from Tel Aviv University. Hey Eitan shared his insights.
Well, of course, when we are seeing and analyzing the Turkish foreign policy, of course, from his perspective, ending the regional conflicts, of course, is coherent with the Turkish foreign policy's nature, of course, in condition that it would satisfy Ankara's demands. When we are looking at Caucasia, we all witnessed the decisive victory of Azerbaijan over Armenia when Azerbaijan liberated the Karabakh region from the Armenian occupation. Of course, from this perspective, Fidan's view makes perfect sense. At the end, the war in Caucasus ended, when it satisfied the Turkish demands. Now we are seeing a very strong Azerbaijan, Armenia, even in the United States, as we are also seeing on the screen that Prime Minister Pashinyan recognizes the territorial integrity of Azerbaijan, and the Armenian diaspora is not also raising voices against him. in a general manner. We are seeing that the Iranian influence is diminishing, the Russian influence is diminishing. So from this perspective, it's not surprising that Mr. Fidan is satisfied. Well, this is a dream come true for Turkey. We all know that Turkey and the Nakhchivan Autonomous Republic of Azerbaijan share a common territory, a border. And thanks to the Zangezur corridor now, we can see a continuous territorial integrity between proper Azerbaijan, Nakhchivan, and Turkey. And also via the Caspian Sea, we can see more coherent and more unity for the Turkic world, including Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and others. So, in my opinion, that's a great message. That's a great plus for the Turkish foreign policy, for the Azerbaijani foreign policy. It is, strengthening the Turkic republics vis-a-vis whom? Vis-a-vis Iran and vis-a-vis Russia. I think that's why the Iranians are not very much welcoming this outcome of the Zangezur corridor. And let me tell you, this Zangezur corridor will also minimize Iran's influence on Armenia, and it can push Armenia into a more Western axis. And we can see Armenia more integrated into Europe and the United States. I think this is also a good point for the Israeli foreign policy as well.
Turkey is making a major investment in Kyrgyzstan energy sector, funding the construction of 2 new hydroelectric power plants that are expected to transform the regional energy landscape and boost electricity exports. More details from the region from our correspondent Fariza Kalimurzina.
A Turkish company is investing $10 billion in the construction of 2 hydroelectric power plants in Kyrgyzstan. This is one of the largest energy agreements the country has signed in recent years. According to Turkish media, a subsidiary of Ihlas Holding, the Central Asian Investment Holding, has reached a deal with Kyrgyzstan's Ministry of Energy to build and operate the plants under a 20-year concession. The project includes the Kazarman and Kokomarem hydropower stations with installed capacities of 912 and 1,305 megawatts. Once completed, they are expected to significantly impact the energy landscape across Central Asia. The deal includes social and development initiatives. 1% of the electricity generated, valued at around $3 million annually, will be provided free of charge to local communities. Government agencies will also receive technical and educational support valued at $3.2 million each year. Kyrgyzstan's Energy Minister Talybek Ibraev called this project a new chapter in the country's energy development. He said the new hydropower plants will make Kyrgyzstan a key link in regional energy corridors connecting China, Pakistan, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. They will also enable electricity exports to Europe through Turkey as part of Middle Corridor and the Belt and Road Initiative. From Almaty, Kazakhstan, Fariza Kalimurzina, A News.
Turkey and Georgia are set to expand their trade relations and strengthen cooperation. It's after Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Georgian President Mikhail Kavalashvili met in Ankara on Tuesday. They discussed regional cooperation, the Middle Corridor projects, the defence industry and peace processes.
Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan on Tuesday welcomed Georgian President Mikhail Kavalashvili with an official ceremony in Ankara. The two leaders held bilateral talks followed by a joint press conference. Their talks covered regional cooperation, economic ties, defence industry, Black Sea security, the peace process in the Caucasus, the war in Ukraine, and the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Describing the Baku-Tbilisi-Kars railway as the backbone of the Middle Corridor, Erdogan emphasised the importance of its full-capacity operation. He said that bilateral trade volume has already surpassed $3 billion, with the next target set at $5 billion. The president also underlined that cooperation in the defence industry and military sphere remains a key priority. The Turkish leader also stressed that trilateral cooperation between Azerbaijan, Georgia and Turkey makes a significant contribution to regional peace. Kavalaşvili also praised Turkey's role in promoting peace in the context of the Russia-Ukraine war. He said he had invited President Erdogan to Georgia and expressed hope to convene the next meeting of the high-level Strategic Cooperation Council in the near future. The Georgian president reaffirmed his country's commitment to actively supporting Azerbaijan-Armenia peace talks, calling the trilateral mechanism a model for regional security. Kavalaşvili said that Turkey is Georgia's #1 trading partner and said the two leaders discussed developing trade relations to expand their export opportunities and explore the potential benefits of free trade agreements. He also highlighted the contribution of the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan oil pipeline and the Baku-Tbilisi-Kars railway to political cooperation. President Kavalaşvili is in Turkey for a 2-day official visit, his first to the country since he took office in December of last year.
Afghanistan and Kyrgyzstan are taking another step towards strengthening economic ties. A high-level Afghan delegation led by Acting Minister of Industry and Commerce is in Bishkek to participate in the Kyrgyzstan Economic Forum. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has more from Kabul.
The delegation is expected to hold a series of bilateral meetings and deliver a speech during a special session of the forum. Officials say the trip is aimed at boosting trade, improving transit routes and building long-term economic partnerships. Since 2021, relations between Afghanistan and Kyrgyzstan have been warming. Kyrgyzstan has formally handed over the Afghan embassy in Bishkek to Kabul's new authorities and removed the Taliban from its list of banned terrorist organizations, moves seen as steps toward normalizing diplomatic engagement. Trade between the two countries has surged. In 2024 alone, a total trade reached $66 million, with Kyrgyzstan exporting goods such as flour, fuel and electronics, and importing Afghan products worth millions. The two nations are also partners in the Kasa 1000 energy project, set to deliver surplus hydroelectric power from Central Asia to Afghanistan and Pakistan by 2025. And with a newly formed joint working group, both sides are eyeing expanded cooperation on road projects and transit corridors. Bishkek Forum could mark a milestone in Afghanistan's economic diplomacy, transforming regional ties from political hesitation to pragmatic partnerships. This is Tamim Bahis in Kabul for A News.
That's all from us from Baku for this morning. Stay tuned to A News for more updates.